To me, healing is an orientation. It's not a destination. I don't think any of us gets there. To me, healing is a process. It is an orientation. It is how I intend to live my life is oriented around healing, which to me is around repair. It's relationship with myself and with others. That's to me what healing is about. And particularly, it's about rebuilding safety, belonging, and dignity. The way I have learned and practiced around trauma is that trauma breaks apart safety, belonging, and dignity. Healing is about the restoration of those capacities and the reintegration of those capacities in us.
Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. Grateful to have you.
Thanks so much for having me, Chase. It's great to be here.
I shared with you before we pressed record that I became familiar with your work from our mutual friend, Brene Brown.
Mhm.
And it's in the context of healing. I believe as humans, we're all healing from lots of wounds. Um, but I'm wondering if in your own words, I've just, shared that your amazing bio with our listeners, but in your own words, what area of life interests you? What area of how do you spend your time in your work universe? What things catch your attention and keep your focus? And as a backstory, just why are you on the show today? What do you talk about, and what do we have to learn from you?
The core questions, the questions that kind of keep me up at night and that guide me forward in my work are how do we change? How do we heal? And how do we stay together when things get really hard?
Mm,
And that ends up meaning that I do lots of work around healing and group process and conflict facilitation, big transitions. I do a lot of work in social movements and thinking about what creates a healthier society and what kinds of organizations do we need to build to get us there. And all of my work, at the core of it is this question of how do we live who we say we are? How do we actually be who we say we are? And that to me is the question of embodiment. How do we live our values? How does it not just, we don't just accumulate ideas, but actually what we do, our behavior, how we are, how we treat people actually matches who we think we are and who we say we are. So those are the things I get excited about that kind of guide my work. And there's a lot of specifics in there about how I do that. But I would say those are the core kind of guiding questions of my life.
amazing. Congrats on the book out in June. What it
Thank
takes
you.
to heal.
Thank
Um,
you.
Instant bestseller,
Thank
and
you.
like that's a big deal. And yet it's not a surprise because it's also not a surprise that we're in a really interesting, awkward,
Mhm.
uncomfortable period right now in
Yeah.
time. It just seems like I think the word that it comes up a lot in your work is upheaval. There
Hmm.
is a lot of it happening. And um, one of my least favorite characteristics that exists in human beings is cynicism. It breaks
Hmm.
my heart when I see it. I get frustrated when I experience it or feel it,
Hmm.
and it seems like that upheaval, cynicism. Um, there's just a lot of that right now, and it's because our concepts of truth, the media platforms that we get information from. It's a very complex universe that we're working in, and I think it's not an accident why your work is very timely, relevant, and exceedingly helpful. So I'm wondering, can you help us understand how you look through their current situation as it relates to your work? Does your work is it because of the
Hmm.
situation that we're in, or would it exist outside of this time and space? Help us understand this a little bit because it feels complex and complicated. And I often, as someone who seeks this kind of conversation, often feel overwhelmed. And yet I feel like I'm pretty well adjusted for it, and I still can't do it. So
Hmm.
help me understand how your work fits so well into our current landscape.
It is a strange time. And I think there's so many words we could use to describe this time. I think it's strange. I think it's hard. I think there's so much discord and uh, animosity, pain, grief, resentment. When we talk about upheaval, I think part of that is, you know, things are kind of coming to the surface and we don't actually know how to deal with everything that's emerging. Um, I see that, I feel that, and I have my moments of maybe cynicism, but maybe also a kind of hopelessness. And I say that really to normalize those feelings that I think a lot of people have. We can want to avoid those feelings of like, I don't know what to do. Is there anything to do? Um, because we always want to be figuring something out. But I do feel, I do have moments of like, I actually don't know how we get through this. I don't know how we get through this intact. And maybe that's not what's really possible in this moment. I think it's a moment of some really, really deeply painful lessons. But I do also really believe it's a moment of emergence, of creativity, of generativity, of transformation. But it depends on how we kind of position ourselves in this moment. So one of the things I really pay attention to a lot is, I do embodiment work. And so I'm interested in what our bodies are doing at any given point in time, how our bodies and the way that our bodies are responding to our environment, to stimulus, to each other, how it shapes our actions, how it shapes our beliefs, how it shapes our worldview. I'm
Mhm.
interested in those questions. And I think this period of time, amidst all the turmoil and uncertainty, which I think is just, it's the reality, I think there's also a reactivity that is really set in our society in particular. We talk about fight, flight, freeze, and all these ways that we respond under pressure, under threat. Um, these are kind of hardwired, as they say, in us, and I think they are more and more being activated in our social spaces, in our familial spaces, in our political spaces. And there's a benefit, when for us to have those kind of reactive tendencies, those stress responses, they can keep us out of danger, they can protect us when things are hard. But they also have a way of keeping us from being receptive, creative, strategic, um, capable of thinking long term. And that's what I'm mostly paying attention to
Mm.
is how is our reactivity keeping us from the kind of solutions, ideas, paths forward that are actually sustainable, regenerative, caring for ourselves and for each other. Instead, I see us so reactive and more deeply entrenched in our reactivity. And I think I think we can also be manipulated. I think all the algorithms and news cycles
Mm.
and all these things that are about kind of capturing our attention are actually also about keeping us in a reactive state, which diminishes um, kind of what we're able to think about and do.
Yeah, there's something that it's sort of like what they've figured out is that by limiting our capacity to manage this stuff, they get to drive. And,
Exactly.
and in this case, I'm talking about, you know, largely, modern media and technology, and
Hmm.
we are the products, right?
Exactly.
That's if there's not something that's being bought or sold, you are the thing that's being bought and sold. And that's simultaneously, heartbreaking. And somehow the knowledge of that it's like there's a crack. And it seems like it's our job to then, okay, we're going to go in that crack. If we know that these platforms and that is, I don't think it's the explicit goal, but it is a downstream effect of their goal to manage our attention and sell us as products, our attention as products rather. So one of the things that is very clear in your work is the role that, well, first of all, that we're not in this alone. If we I hate to use the word right, if we do it right, or if we maybe lean into your methodology or the way that you share about it in your book. I'm a huge person about a community. I've written about it at length. I've built, a number of multi-million person communities. And there is certainly this feeling that when we're cultivating community, I feel like I'm less alone, I'm less isolated. And then on the back end of this pandemic, we've all just come out of being like radically isolated like never before. And so the question is as you mentioned, I think path through it is what one of the words that you used or the phrases. What role does our community play as a path through that? I just got chills because it's so like gut wrenching, and I simultaneously feel it's possible. And it's like, I look at the mountain that we have to climb, and it's, that's the feelings that you talk about feelings in the body. That's what I'm getting right now. And what role does community play in that?
Community is everything, and I think we are realizing that more and more, but at the same time, we're noticing, oh, we kind of lack the skills and practice. When you talk about the kind of lockdown portion of the pandemic, it was this period of time where, people lost their social skills in a way.
I
And
felt awkward as hell coming out of that.
yeah, yeah.
I was like, why is my mouth not work anymore? What's my brain is like 10 minutes ago. It was horrible.
Exactly. I remember going to visit some friends and they had had very few visitors. It was some elders in my community. They had had very few visitors and I went to visit them and there just was no conversation. I kept trying to start the conversation and it seemed like something in them hadn't bounced back from that time. And it both, it provides you this stark example of, oh, we really thrive when we are in each other's presence. We really need community. We really need each other. And, what they call this kind of epidemic of loneliness can really, it's the isolation that we experience, but we also lose the skills to actually reach for each other.
Yeah.
We lose the skills to say, hey, I need help. Or can I bring you something? I made extra dinner tonight. Can I bring it to you? We kind of lose that connective relational tissue. And that's, a lot of my work now is figuring out how do we rebuild that and build it stronger than we've had it before so that we can be vulnerable enough, real enough to actually build trust with each other, to
Mm,
communicate well
mm,
with each other, to actually allow ourselves to be with, to not just sort of sitting in the same place looking at our phones, but actually be with each other and change each other. It's so, so, so incredibly vital. And as a parent, I'm a new-ish parent. I have almost a 3-year-old kid, and it's incredibly isolating in so many ways to have a kid. And you can realize, when you have a kid, you're like, oh, it shouldn't be done this way.
yeah. It's
It
not how it's
can't be
supposed to
done
be.
like
Yeah.
this.
Right.
Yeah. I need people, and you can have thousands of followers, but no one that can pick up your kid from school if you have a flat tire. And that's the kind of conundrum we're in right now. And I think there's something we have to do. I love technology, and I think it can help us find our way back to each other. And I think there's some really analog and embodied ways we have to learn to tolerate and embrace connection with each other again.
Mm, mm. I am just coming out of I would just, there's no other word for me than grueling. I'm not naturally a writer. I'm a visual artist, and yet I write books. Super valuable, super painful for me.
Yeah.
And I'm on the other end of that. And the piece that I just finished that's going to come out here in the fall is it's basically there's a big piece of it is it's not that we're seeking perfection.
Hmm.
It's that no actually believing and understanding that hey, there's lots of stuff that's going to break. It's not about avoiding mistakes. It's about recovering quickly and returning to ourselves over and over again, just 1% better, 1% faster, 1% more authentic, more heartfelt, more connected. And so, that's the hopeful part of me is like, hey, okay, we have experienced this. We got technology working against us. We've got modern culture working against us, but it's our job to find the path back to, I say ourselves, like for me, it's myself because it's around self-betrayal. Like,
Yeah.
what are you pursuing? You're pursuing your own
Hmm.
goals or the goals that the world wants for you,
That's right.
but it's extendable, it's extensible rather into this universe as well. Like our goal is not to like never fall apart, or not that when you have a child it's that you made some catastrophic error. It's like, no, now I have to go back and rebuild. Who are the people that I'm going to call
Yeah.
when I get a flat tire? Because it's not like I'm not going to get any more flat tires. It's
That's
not
right.
like, it's about being 1% better. So, you have a framework around this embodiment
Yeah.
that, like, I'm fascinated by, by somatic work and a lot of the therapies that you practice and have been emerging for, in the recent period here. So can you help us think about this? Give me a framework or give us a framework for hope and some guidance here. I believe it's possible, but we need some guides.
Well, I want to start with this piece that you said about being 1% better. I talk about in my work and in the book, I talk about this concept of transformational characters, which is a
Yeah,
borrowed from family systems work. But I'm talking about all of us that are trying, which I imagine are a lot of the people that are listening to your podcast right now. It's
for
like
sure.
people that are trying to figure out their own healing and transformation, how they contribute in meaningful ways to the world and the healing and transformation of the world. And I set the bar in a way both very low and very high. And that, the book is about and my work is about everyone who is trying. That's it. And that's in a way a low bar, but it's also a very high bar. Like people
Yeah.
who are really trying and grappling and are willing to do the work, so to speak. And so when you talk about that perfection, I'm like, yeah, I want to break up with that altogether. I want to break up with this idea that we're gonna be perfect or we always have to be kind of good people all the time. I think a lot of the challenges we're facing right now is that people can't really understand that we're complex beings all the time.
Yeah.
We are not going to get through this life. Yes, we strive and we do and we try to align, but if we have this idea that we're kind of perpetually good all the time, it's going to trap us and keep us from being actually accountable where we need to be accountable
Mhm.
and unable to change where we need to change. We are people who are in process, and that is so, so, so important. And that to me is what embodiment is about. It kind of softens our relationship to our own bodies. It says the body and my being is not just I don't just relate to myself through control. I got to be good enough. I got to look good enough. I got to be better. Or somebody wants me to be like this, or my parents told me I had to act like this. A lot of us approach ourselves with this kind of stifling, controlling. We often use shame and all these ways we punish ourselves to get back in line. And what I'm trying to say is, I think if we approach ourselves with curiosity, with listening, that's
Mm.
actually the root of healing, of growing, of maturation, of all of these capacities that I think are desperately needed today. It comes from relating to ourselves, our own emotional lives, our expression, in a much more curious, listening way. And so that's really where I began embodiment. But embodiment to me is being rooted in the seat of yourself. It's living from yourself. It's being able to feel your life, experience your life, and live your life in a way that aligns with what you deeply believe and long for. And that increases your sensitivity. You can feel more of it. And it means that you have to practice the things that you want to do and unlearn some of the things that you learned through your family and their own kind of trauma adaptive practices. You have to unlearn some of that, unlearn some of the societal beliefs about how we should relate to each other and start to practice something else, which requires not just your thinking, but that your body do something different too.
The Body Keeps the Score was is a really impactful book that I think you've I believe she's shouted you out pretty seriously on the internet as like I think she said I love this book or something like that about you. The Body Keeps the Score is I again I mentioned my wife. She shared that with me a really long time ago and she discovered it. And the sensations of the body, they have we have such an opportunity to learn from them. And the fact that, for example, fear and excitement feel so similar in the body. There's something for us to learn there.
Yeah.
So, and yet the concept of embodiment, I feel like, is a term that it's very, very important that we understand it. And yet it feels simultaneously very complex.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And it's like this. So I'm hoping for people for this, there's a lot of people that this is a new term for. I would say I'm new to it in the past few years, but it's because I live with a person who's a practitioner and,
Yeah.
and so I feel that your work does a lot of justice to help us wrangle that. Can you talk a little bit more about, because feeling like your authentic self is it's like I understand the words that come out of your mouth, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
what does the practice feel like? What does that mean?
Yeah.
Talk about the sort of the head heart connection that has to happen the empathy, sympathy, the desire for it. Like, talk to us
Hmm.
about, because embodiment is a fuzzy term that I feel like holds a lot of interesting information.
I had a friend share a meme yesterday that was like, I want to listen to a podcast where parents explain what their kids do for a living. And it made me laugh so hard because I think there's no way that my parents could explain what it is that I do. My mom used to say for a long time, you're doing that semantics work, talking about somatics work. And it's something in a way that is so, 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 so simple. And because it is about your feeling, how we feel, it's actually really hard to describe, but I'm going to do my best. Um, when you talk about sensations in the body and feeling your sensations, the reason why that is important is because that is who you are. That is how you actually feel. And we ignore what's actually happening in our bodies, the heart
Mm,
palpitations, the sweating, the tightening of the jaw, the, the moving of the blood to our extremities when we want to fight or when we want to run. We ignore these sensations because there is a simultaneous track happening of what I should do in any given situation, who I should be, my idea of who I am, what this kind of social situation requires, and we learn over time and through training and through our culture and society how to suppress and deprioritize what it is that we sense from our own bodies. But what is happening in your own body is the truth of who you are. It's how you feel. It doesn't mean, oh, there's blood pumping to my fist. I'm going to punch someone in this moment. But you know that you're angry and you know that there's something that needs to be expressed for you. You know that you feel that something unjust has happened. You know that because that is how your body is responding. Now, you may do some work and say, is this justified? Is this about something else? But that's the relationship with your body. So I just want to say that that is what you feel and your sensations is who you are. And all the stress and tension and contraction you put on top of that is what you think you're supposed to be. So, embodiment in my work is one, developing an awareness and a sensitivity to what is actually happening in your body, turning down the volume on all the other stories and narratives that kind of keep you in check, and turning up the volume on what is actually happening at any given point in time.
mm,
It's also about understanding the ways you've come to kind of construct yourself and what that's based on, what that allows you to do and what it limits. So, I've been doing this work in groups for a long time, and you'll have people come in and they may have, a striving body. So we talk about a body that's just like ready to do things all the time. And in a way, you're like, that's me, that's me. And it does wonderful
oh,
things.
sometimes it does terrible things
And
though.
sometimes it does terrible things. There's always a benefit and a cost. And that's what we help people understand. It's like, the body that you wear every day and that you may be stuck in. It's not that we want to get rid of the striving body. It's that we want flexibility to have other bodies too.
Yeah.
So that's what we practice is like what is it that you take on? What does it mean to you? What does it allow you to do? What's the cost? And then what would you like your body to be able to feel, do? What is it longing to express? And how do we practice those things? So I, had a hard time receiving and expressing love. And, I have this whole thing where I listen to Whitney Houston playlists and I sang myself love songs. But I also would practice with myself and with my partner, just letting my chest become soft to touch because my chest was blocking, I was tight here. It's tight, kind of blocking out that sensation. And so I softened my body. And when I softened that, it actually changed the things that I felt, said, did, moved towards, moved away from. Our bodies in many ways, I joke with a lot of my clients is that your body can be holding on to something that happened 20 years ago. You can be holding on to that contraction in your shoulders. You can be holding on to that contraction in your face, and you don't even know it anymore. But it's dictating your relationships in the present. It's dictating what's possible with your children, with your partners at work, and it's really unresolved fear, anger, whatever it might be. But your body can be sort of held hostage to the past. And what I'm really interested is how we free up those aspects of our body so that we can be more here now and more flexible, permeable, creative, and not as rigid.
There is a very important piece of that, which is the word now. And
Yes.
I am freaking
Yeah.
obsessed
Yeah.
with time, with Eckhart Tolle, with
Yeah.
the belief that we are somehow our past. And yet, surprisingly, if I asked anyone to pretend to be a different person, if you are normally X, just pretend, act
Yeah.
for just a second. It seems like there's a little slice of proof in there that we actually, and especially in an embodied sense of the word, if I said, okay, I understand you might be experiencing grief right now, become a stand-up comedian, a hilarious, like loving, open, loud,
Yeah.
gregarious person in a minute, in a
Yeah.
second.
Yeah.
You could. Most people could.
Yeah.
And so to me, there is simultaneously something that is powerful and intriguing, which is, are we literally, in your term of embodiment, are we our past? And or can we undo our condition? Can we change it in a second? Because I feel like if I can act it even
Can
for a
you
second,
can you sustain it?
that's where, but that's practice to me.
Yeah. Hmm.
That's practice. It's like, if you can, we're so attached to who we think we are based on, 45 years of conditioning.
Yep.
And
Yep. Yep.
yet, to me, that a little, there's some way that holds us back, because this,
I
like,
don't
oh,
disagree with you. Yeah.
there's like, time has to pass for me to suddenly feel different in my body. Take the example you just gave. Like, when I soften my chest, I get to be
Yeah.
different. I am different.
You are
And it's like
different.
that. You go
Hmm.
from your chest was not soft to soft, and you do that in a pretty constrained frame of time. It can be said, or it can be thought that, okay, I'm different now.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so
Yep.
the practice lies in the space of, like, okay, how do you, and you use the word sustain. Like, I can do it for a second. Well, then, okay, great. Can you do it for 2 seconds?
Because practice is the thing about practice, the reason why we can't sustain it is because there are competing motivations in the body. And so you can access that state and maybe long for it, but you do, like you said, you have a well-worn path of these other things that are active, or you may have unresolved content. Practice is so necessary because that is where we confront the competing motivations. Like if I sit and meditate, for example, I might meditate one day, everything goes well. I might meditate another day, and I'm thinking about a million different things. Oh, I got to do this. You're actually confronting the barriers. You're confronting the habits through practice. That's why you practice, is because you're confronting the competing motivations. It's not, you don't get to skip over the confrontation with those motivations. You're still gonna have to
Wouldn't that
feel
be
it.
nice? Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
nice?
But
Oof.
there may be grief in there, there may be pain, there may be stories, there may just be bodily sensations. But practice is the ongoing confrontation with the barriers that keep you from living as the person that you long to be.
I believe that there is a cultural belief that is so hard to do
Hmm.
that. So
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
I know people who are addicts, who
Yeah.
are aware that they are addicts, and they look at the mountain and they say, man, too hard.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna maybe throttle back in my addiction. I'm gonna be addiction light, and
Yeah.
that's how I'm gonna manage it, because the real work, the deep, hard, knowing, body sensation, transformation, that's just too much for me. I talk to them about it, I feel it, I
Totally.
sense it, they're aware of it, I'm aware of it, and they've just decided too much. So
Totally.
can you validate, invalidate,
Hmm.
how if there's someone who shows up in your for therapy with you, and that is their challenge, how do you help them think about it?
Well,
Because
I do say,
there's someone who's listening right now
oh
who's
yeah,
like, I'm like, I got you, I
yeah,
found you, I'm pointing at you. Help us, help that person.
absolutely. It is fucking hard. I don't know if I can say that on your show,
You
Chase, but
absolutely, because that's real life. We have real life here in this show, no fiction.
it absolutely is fucking hard. And it's hard because there are hard things to feel. There are hard things that any coping that we have, whatever it is avoiding something that is really hard to feel. So, when I work with people, I never know exactly what it is that they have to feel. I'll never know exactly what it feels like for them. But I can tell by their resistance, by the challenge, that it's fucking hard to feel. So my question as a practitioner when I work with people is what kind of resource, what kind of relationship do we have to have? I get to work really creatively with people working through embodiment. What do you need to make it feelable? Because that's the only question. It 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 either will be felt and you will be transformed, or it will be unfelt, and in a million different ways it'll take you down. So, what are
Wow.
the conditions that will help you feel what it is? The other thing I want to remind people here as we're in this conversation is that you're always practicing something. It may feel scary to practice the things that I'm talking about because you'll have to deal with the things that seem unfeelable to you. But every day that you get up, you're practicing something. And maybe you're practicing suppressing grief. Maybe you're practicing suppressing joy. Maybe you're practicing isolation. You're still practicing and you're perfecting that. So, how do you want to? I ask my students this, like, how do you want to organize your life? What do you want to be? What do you want your practice to be in service of? And you've got to let that question kind of ripple through your life some because you're never not practicing. You're never not efforting towards something. But is it towards something that is life-giving or life-draining?
So that was maybe like the heaviest, hardest hitting, like 45 seconds of this show in like the last year. Holy smokes. Again, here my arms are standing up. And what really hit for me personally there was
Mm,
I am aware of that you're always practicing and you're either practicing things that are in service of the things you want to be and become, or
that's
they're
right.
they're potentially doing the opposite. And probably there's a bunch of stuff in between. But
Absolutely.
what really punched me straight in the mouth was the idea that what needs to be true in order for you to feel this stuff.
Yeah, that's it,
That
Chase.
that that whole question, like what has to be true, is really powerful. I, as a coach, I use that, like what has to be true for you to believe that you can do this. So what
Yeah.
has to be true, to use your words again, what has to be true for you to be able to feel this?
That's the question. And I,
Mm.
you know, to practitioners, to coaches, to therapists, that's the question. That's the question at the core of your work of transformation. I worked with someone recently and they're like, I get frustrated when my clients don't feel safe enough. No. The question is, what do they need to get there? What do they need from the relationship with you? What do they need about the way the room is organized? What do they need to get to the point where they can feel the thing that they've been avoiding feeling? That is the question that I hold so, so, so central to what I do.
I understand why, because it's a freaking laser beam. It's like,
Yeah.
like you can't, that is like, there's no escaping that. I want to see people try and get out from underneath that one in a therapy session. You use the term healing very
hmm
broadly. And
hmm
I love that actually. I
hmm
really love that that's a big thing to put your arm around. So help us
Yeah,
understand how you think about that. And again, I feel like I want to go back to the book, What It Takes to Heal, How Transforming Ourselves Can Change the World.
absolutely.
Talk to us about healing, that word.
Gosh, it's such a popular word, and so I was a little bit nervous to even touch it, but here it is on the cover of the book, What It Takes to Heal. And I talk about it in the book. Um, to me, healing is an orientation. It's not a destination. I don't think any of us gets there. Maybe we do. Maybe we reach some state of enlightenment, but many of us don't. To me, healing is a process. It is an orientation. It it is how I intend to live my life is oriented around healing, which to me is around repair. It's relationship with myself and with others. That's to me what healing is about. And particularly, it's about rebuilding safety, belonging, and dignity, which I talk about in the book. Trauma, the way I have learned and practiced around trauma is that trauma breaks apart safety, belonging, and dignity, these kind of inherent capacities we have of thinking generally I can be safe in this world and I belong with this world and people in it and I offer something unique. Kind of come in with that capacity and trauma comes in and goes, nope, you can't have all those together anymore. You might feel unsafe. You might feel like you don't belong. You might feel like you have nothing to offer. And that stays with us. Healing is about the restoration of those capacities and the reintegration of those capacities in us. And I think that's an incredible pursuit in one's life to keep focusing on belonging, to keep focusing on safety, to keep focusing on dignity. And just to take it back to your earlier point about being in the now, I also talk about healing as the process that brings more of you to this moment. That's kind of all that it is to me. It's like whatever will bring more of you here now is healing.
It's crazy because you can almost make a list. I think that's probably in a therapy session, I would imagine. Like
Mm,
that's the work, right? Is like, what do you need? That's an inside question, right?
yeah,
Hmm. What do I need?
yeah.
I
It's the
need,
it's the question.
hmm. Is there some magic around getting better to asking ourselves that? Or is it just like all that shit in the world? You just have to actually do it. And it's just you have to get better at practicing that instead of something else. There's no shortcuts.
I wish there were shortcuts. The thing I've really been leaving people with is probably the hardest thing for people to do, but embodiment and transformation, all this begins with listening. It begins with curiosity. It begins at assuming maybe I don't know everything about myself and how I'm showing up. And yes, I can put a bunch of skills on top of this and try things and plan everything. And, I'm one of those people too. And I think that's great. But we don't give enough room for the practice of listening and curiosity and getting to know ourselves. And whether you do that through meditation or somatic work or whatever path you take towards embodiment or transformation, if you don't have the capacity to listen in, if you don't have the capacity to be curious about yourself, you don't have the capacity to grow and change and transform. So, whatever you do, listen. Whatever you do, approach yourself with curiosity. Drop the judgment if you can. Drop the shoulds. Drop what you're supposed to be doing, and just have a moment, a pocket of time where you can be curious. And that's the beginning of the path. That's the trailhead for me.
I feel tempted to end the conversation there because that's like the biggest mic drop moment ever, but I can't. I thought you thought I was gonna let you go, but I can't because curious little me here has got a couple more.
I love
That
that.
okay, well, being quiet or still, creating that space to listen is the plight of 99% of the people who are listening to this right now.
Yeah.
1% of us have a practice that allows us to listen. And the other 99% of us, and I'm putting myself in that category, despite having been meditating with TM for more than 10 years, I'm in the 99% that the ability to just shut up and actually be still for long enough to be curious, for
Yeah.
thoughts to arise rather than for me to inject them into that little space. When I just create enough of it, I just got something, I shoot a little, it's like a dart. I just like fire it into my own neck. And it's part of the culture we're in, moving
Yeah,
faster than ever
yeah,
before.
yeah,
I do blame the fact that information moves quicker than ever before. Even the fact that on social media, when back when we were, living in smaller groups,
yeah.
villages, towns, you could, in fact, the only way for you to see mastery, for example, was to watch someone start to
Yeah.
ride the bike, fall down, start
Yeah.
to ride the bike a little further, fall down, start to ride, oh, became good at riding their bike. And then pretty soon they're the best at riding a bike in the whole village. And
Mm,
but you watched that progression. Or
yeah.
if you just were young and you came into being and there was a master, you heard stories about how hard they used to work to learn to ride their bike further, better, faster, all of the things.
Mm,
Now we just see the best in the world
yeah.
through a pipe that goes right into our brain, and we have no context. We think that effortless brilliance is actually a thing, and it sets us up for failure.
Yeah.
So, in this world where information is moving quickly, where we have completely unrealistic projections of what's possible, what we ought to do, should do, how do we quiet all of that stuff out so we can allow this space, so we can ask ourselves question so we can just be and feel our body, because it feels like you got to go on a 10-day retreat of Vipassana
Hmm.
just to get a taste of it. Is it possible in our everyday lives? And how do you coach people to think about that? Because if it is the key, as you said, create some space for curiosity, lack of judgment, quiet, to listen, how do we do that?
It's such an important question, Chase. And the question I probably get most often is really a question. You framed it a bit differently, but I often get the question about time. How do I do this with limited time?
Mhm.
And maybe going on a retreat is, if you have the resources to do that, that might be helpful in having a supportive place to detox, but to also get to, which is, again, I love questions, but to get to this question of what am I afraid to feel if I slow down? What am I afraid is going to show up if I slow down? Do I know? And what am I afraid will fall apart if I slow down? Just for a moment. It's important to know that because that's going to be the motivator. And usually it's connected to survival. I don't think I can stop working because what if I grew up without a lot of resources and I feel that fear all the time of, "Oh, I got to keep going because I might end up without resources because I know what that feels like." That's a fear that motivates me. It keeps me moving forward. So getting clear on that is important. But the other thing I really want to say to people is that when I'm talking about embodiment or what we call center and somatics, this is a place that is not, it's sort of outside of the question of time. And I don't want to get too philosophical, though I think it is. You talk about Eckhart Tolle, that's what we're talking about. So if you're if you find yourself going up, it's mindfulness. If you go up the stairs, if you retreat, as a lot of people do, to the bathroom and scroll on your phone forever, in those moments, it doesn't take a long time to find center and to find this place where you can be okay in yourself. It's not that it takes time. It's that you just have to keep journeying back to it. You have to keep remembering that it's there. You have to keep finding a pocket to return. It takes no time at all, in a way. It may take
Mhm.
you a lot of time to find it because you've put up a lot of barriers. You put a lot of things in the
Yeah.
way between your thinking self and your centered self. But once you start to knock down those barriers one by one, understand what they are, the fears, the concerns, the discomfort, the emotions that you don't really like to feel, you start knocking down those barriers. It takes no time at all to center. It's right there. It's right next to you at all moments. So you got to cultivate a practice to get there, but I would say make it simple. Do it as you're walking up the steps. Do it for 1 minute each day, 30 seconds each day. Try to find stillness, and eventually you'll crave it, long for it, and it will start to be the hum underneath how you live your life. And I always say to people, like, center is a place that we all can meet. When I'm with people who are operating from their center or working together from our center, it feels like we're able to exit the kind of time and frenzy. So cultivate that place of center. Let's find each other there to support each other to get there. And I think that's actually going to give us something that we desperately need in this time. So practice, understand yourself. It's right there. It's right next to you.
It's all available for us all right there.
It's right there.
Whew. I need to go lay down.
Good.
I am very grateful for your time. Thank you so much. Again, highly, highly recommend the book, What It Takes to Heal, How Transforming Ourselves Can Change the World. Any other places in the world you'd like to direct our attention while you've got it now? I know that we're great at buying books and helping support authors, and it's a very curious listenership. Anything else, anywhere else you'd direct us?
First, I just want to say I have so much gratitude, Chase, for the thoughtfulness of your questions, for the conversation. I feel really touched. And for folks that are interested in our work, you can visit me on my website, prentishempill.com, theembodimentinstitute.org. That is the organization that I co-founded, and my podcast, Becoming the People. And I talk to folks that are kind of mindfully on this path of individual and social transformation. So you can join me there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show. We're big fans, so always welcome here. Any work you do will be welcome for our listeners and myself as well. Obviously, it's a little bit, it's kind of for me. I'm not gonna lie. I'm kind
It's
of, that's a
beautiful.
little
I
therapy
love
session
it.
there by
Same.
design. Grateful for you. Until next time, we bid you an amazing day. Thanks for listening, everyone.